Hi everyone, and welcome to another episode of GCS Connect, the Leaders Series. Today we've got Adriele Parker and Caren Young from the new company, DEI in a Box. DEI in a Box is a on-demand platform which can be used for diversity and inclusion. And it's something that GCS themselves have been working with very closely in the last months. It's a new product and something that we think can be really, really helpful for our viewers, for our listeners, and for our customers in really pushing forward this element of a business which should become a real central tenet to what people do. So we've talked a lot in here about Adriele and Caren's journey into being DEI consultants, why they feel this product is so important, and also talk through some tips and advice that companies and leaders particularly can work on in terms of setting the right sort of environment, asking why they're doing this, how I'm going to be successful, and maybe time boxing as well, which are all important things, both in terms of attracting talent from a diverse background, but also in terms of creating a really inclusive environment which retains talent from a diverse background. So without further ado, we've got Adriele and Caren from DEI in a Box talking to me today, and hope you enjoy it. Thank you. Hi everyone. Hi Caren. Hi Adriele. How are you?
Doing
Great.
well.
How are you?
Fantastic. We've got a very international feel. We've got Caren in Chicago, myself in London, and Adriele in Brooklyn today. So welcome to the GCS Connect Leaders Series. Great to have two co-founders of DEI in a Box, which is a new actionable guide. It's an online platform to help organizations put together, construct, and really think about a diversity strategy. Obviously, DEI is something that's really, really increasing. It has always been important, but it's increasing in importance, particularly in the last couple of years. And it's something that our customers, our candidates, and our consultants at GCS and in our kind of community are talking about a lot. So we thought it'd be great to get these experts on the show to talk about it. So we have Adriele Parker and Caren Young, both coming from a business background, but kind of coming together, I think, to really put together something that can simplify and help businesses to promote this and actually put together a strategy. But it's great to have you here. I know you've been working on this product now for the last 9-10 months, so it's quite an interesting story how you put it together. I think it's supposed to start off as a book, and it's grown into a platform, hasn't it, Adriele?
Yes, that's exactly what happened. Caren and I, we worked on the same team together, and we were on a DEI team together at a tech company. And once we departed, we kept in touch, and we both went into doing consulting on our own. And we kind of just kept realizing it felt as though we were reinventing the wheel over and over with a lot of our clients in terms of helping them start to construct and even just roll out a comprehensive DEI strategy. And so we're like, what would happen if we just wrote a very comprehensive book or guide? And we started writing it. And as we were going along, we're like, this actually could be more like an on-demand program. And so that's how DEI in a Box came to be.
Brilliant. And Caren, you for yourself, it's been something, because obviously you come from a background as a product manager, and the kind of the advertising side and putting this product together. It's looking at the product itself. It's something that's really really like put together as a full product, isn't it? That you can just kind of open the box and really get that strategy, can't you?
Absolutely. We wanted to think about it the same way you would if you were creating any sort of campaign or an app or a website. Spend a little time building the foundation, the whys and wherefores, creating some actions behind it, and kind of a where to go from here, and how do you know you've been successful. So we wanted to use that same approach that we would in product development and apply it to DEI.
Fantastic. And just kind of go into a bit of your backgrounds, because obviously you've come out of that industry background. This is your first, I mean, you've worked as consultants, but this is your kind of first startup business, right?
Well, sort of.
Yeah, okay.
I would say our consultancies are probably our first startup business.
Yeah.
But this is our first partnership.
Okay.
And it's been wonderful. It's been wonderful kind of continuing to work together with Adriele, and like having two big brains in a room is pretty awesome. It's pretty awesome.
Yes.
So being able to put all of this together and to really bounce off of each other and be able to play to each other's strengths has been really wonderful.
And obviously, yeah, because as a consultant, I was going to say one man band there, but that's not, I shouldn't be saying this sort of thing. So, you're working as a singular person, and then you kind of come into kind of working together. Lots of startup businesses are like that, aren't they? It's very difficult to do it on your own with no real support. So did you feel like, as leaders, that it was important to come into this together, backing each other, working together?
I think so, right? As Caren said, you have kind of these two giant brains coming together, and while we do have some similarities in our backgrounds, they're also pretty different in a lot of ways. And the work that we tend to gravitate towards is quite different as well in the DEI space. So the things that Caren's an expert on, I'm not as strong in, and vice versa. And so it's really great. As we were writing this, it just kind of flowed. There were like areas, for example, I got my start in recruiting. So I just kind of, as we were powering through the recruitment part, it was very easy for me to just like pour it all out. And vice versa. When we got to leadership engagement, that was all Caren, who is an expert in that area. So yeah, definitely.
And as you plan out the business kind of going forward now, do you see the future of that, and how you'll split down those responsibilities within the business? Or is it not something you've had a chance to think about yet?
Well, yeah, we're kind of taking it a step at a time. I think right now our focus is kind of on, getting people ramped up with the product. And we've had a lot of DEI professionals that are really interested in it. And so our focus right now in the coming months is on developing a train the trainer program specifically for DEI professionals who want to use this tool. Caren, any thoughts or things to add?
Yeah, I think that continuing to think about it like a product, this is a first stab. Like, let's see what the market bears, and let's see what that looks like for us moving forward. I'm definitely a huge fan of thinking agile and lean, and so let's get the feedback and let's find out what people are asking for, and then how we can best serve the marketplace that way.
Well, I think our feedback is very positive, because we're going to be one of your first customers, so we're very excited about that. And I think I can come into it myself as a leader, and it's something that, I think I've been quite open and honest with Adriele when we've spoken about this before. As a technology recruiter, I've always been very skills based, so very kind of, if you need Java, I'll find Java on a CV, and I'll place the person with Java. And I'll never ever think about, not in a nasty way, not in a kind of an opinionated way. I won't think about your background at all. All I'll care about is, does this CV match? And I think that it's been a real wake up call in the last couple of years, when people have asked me, as someone with 25 years recruitment experience, to really think about that. And is that the right way to go about it? Maybe a former me would have said, well, no, because that's fair, right? So, that's being, I think the word is like, colorblind or blind to gender or something like that. I've got nothing behind that. But I think the last 2 years have shown us that, I think even IT and tech recruiters have to go a bit deeper than that, don't they? Than just match the skill set, because there's a lot more going on beyond that is actually driving the types of people that you see in applications, in computer science degrees, that sort of thing, isn't there? And I guess that's one of the things that DEI and diversity training can really help you to be aware of, right?
Absolutely. I think there are certainly, I was a tech recruiter for a bit. And so there are
Mm,
certainly, biases that we have as recruiters that we may not even notice, even when we are trying to be as objective as possible and focusing
mm,
on criteria and qualifications and making sure that we're picking, the best person for the job. And sometimes we're kind of heads down focused on that. And we look up and we're like, oh my goodness, I contributed to this really homogenous workplace.
yeah.
And then you may have a sprinkle or two of people that are kind of diverse from the rest of the
Mm,
majority, um, which is a problem in itself. But then when you're talking about the tech space, you also have to think about representation in terms of the product, right? Like, does the people that are building this, are they aware of diversity, right, and equity and inclusion as they're designing something? And so having that representation can actually contribute to that, which is, I think, overall contributing to the overall business goals at the end of the day and making companies more innovative.
Yeah,
yeah.
absolutely. And even as we talk about, bringing people in, like it's not always just about bringing people into the funnel. What are you
Mm,
doing with people once they're already there? And
yeah.
so retention is just as important as hiring and sourcing. How are you creating an environment for those who are from marginalized communities to want to thrive and grow? What opportunities are you giving them to stretch? What does promotion look like? What does compensation look like? Like, how are you keeping people in addition to always bringing people in? So yeah, so you
Yeah.
have to kind of look at the entire life cycle of the employee also.
And I think particularly in technology recruitment, one of the key elements is maybe gender based, isn't it? It's the huge dominance. I mean, you talk about male dominated industries, but IT is the ultimate male dominated industry, really, isn't it? It's crazy, when you think about the amount of females that go into computer science courses and kind of come out and um, are graduates on the other side. And if I look back over my 25-year history, I would say that based on ethnicity, it's a lot wider, like a lot more diverse. Whereas I look at the placements I've made in terms of gender diversity, it's I would 5% max
Yeah.
that I've placed, which is mad, really, isn't it? Because it's the one thing about technology is it's completely unbiased, surely, towards skills, isn't it? You either
Right.
can program, or you can't program, or is it? I don't know. This may be a question I'm asking here.
I actually would separate it a little bit more.
Okay,
So if we're looking at like jobs and technology that are not coding directly related, there
sure.
is much more gender equality. So
Okay,
you'll find more women in product roles, in design
right.
roles, in
Yeah,
QA roles, but not as
yeah,
much as straight engineering. That's where that breakout happens. I
yeah.
think
Okay.
that there's also, when talking about racial diversity, if
Mm,
we take out East and South Asian folks who in tech are not technically considered underrepresented in tech, they're underrepresented
in other
generally,
areas.
but
Yeah.
in tech, they are not considered underrepresented.
No.
If you take East and South Asian folks out,
Mm,
there is a pretty stark difference
yeah, for sure. No,
in
I
what
agree.
racial diversity looks like. I don't know, Adrienne, if you want to add on to that.
No, yeah, no, that's super important to call, especially in the States. I think there's a heavier focus. And I see generally globally, I see the focus is often more so on gender. Um,
Mhm.
Mm,
but then in the States, we have gender and then this kind of race ethnicity simply because of the history of our short history in the United States
yeah.
based on that.
Yeah, and I think coming back to yourselves as leaders, and obviously people that have kind of risen to the top of your businesses. Did you see that as a challenge for yourself? To get to where you got to within the business, and what how did you overcome those challenges?
Ooh, that's a tough one. I mean, I think similar to Caren, I think we both were in a place where we were working in other capacities before we
Sure.
entered the DEI space specifically. And we happened to look up and be like, oh, I'm the only person here. Like
Yeah.
that was me. I mean, I was going to an office as a recruiter in, Manhattan, New York, which is very diverse. And I would commute there. I saw all sorts of people, different ages, backgrounds, types. And then I got to the office and I was the only Black woman sitting there for a very long time. And so there was just that desire to want to do something. And I think, along the way in my journey, I've experienced plenty of microaggressions. Even working as a DEI person, I still experience them. So I think that in itself can be a challenge, certainly emotionally, mentally. It can be draining. I don't know that, my ethnicity or my race or my gender has been a blocker in any way. At least in the DEI space, right? I don't think it has caused any issues there. I think a lot of times people are more inclined because they're like, oh, there's this person who is, a subject matter expert who is also diverse and has a unique perspective. So I think it can be more of an advantage in some ways for DEI.
Yeah. For me, it was a little bit of a hindrance in the product space, just because product is dominated by white men. So walking into the room, there were moments where folks were like, so are you taking notes? Or are you like kind of here as a helper? I was like, no, I'm actually leading the project. I'm actually leading the project. And that was a little bit of a challenge, just kind of overcoming the perception of what a manager looks like. But I think that it has ironically been a helper for me once I transitioned to DEI, because I have the product background. I know how to speak the language and I know how to do so in a way that's effective. So it's allowed me to be able to kind of bridge that gap between just being a DEI person and actually someone who understands what the true needs and asks of the organization really are.
Yeah, and do you feel, within DEI, I know one of the key things that you talk about within DEI in a box is around leadership. It's about getting the strategy right, getting the leaders on board, making it a central core tenet of the business, as opposed to, and you mentioned earlier, the DEI team, which is a little bit like the carbon neutral team. It could be, right? It could be like, we're doing this, CSR, that sort of thing. But I think what you've really focused on is making sure that from the top down, from everyone's bought into this, right? That's one of the things you see as key.
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, we see DEI as everyone's responsibility, but we see that leaders have an added responsibility, right, as the decision makers to, make sure that they are bought into this and that they're actively participating. It's one thing to have leaders say, yes, we approve this thing, and that just kind of sign off on budget. But it's a different thing to have leaders that do that and also are actively engaged in some of the programs or the initiatives or just the conversations, to see leaders that are speaking up before being asked to, acknowledge that there may be an issue, right? We may be lacking in diversity. They don't wait for anyone else to call that out. And so we certainly prioritize the importance of having leadership's engagement and involvement throughout this entire process.
And we talk about it similar to the way that you would any initiative. Like, you would never go to market or build a new product feature or build a new initiative or new marketing campaign without getting buy-in from leadership. Like, you would never do that. So why would you do the same thing with DEI?
Yeah, you have to. Yeah, it has to be. If it's going to be a central tenet of your business, the leadership has to kind of really think about that as well. And one of the, I'm just almost talking from. Is that sometimes one of the difficulties, do you think? Because we talk about, maybe leadership being kind of white and male. Is that one of the things to overcome? And maybe there is a slight kind of like a fear factor of change. People don't like change. Is that something you work on and work with quite a lot? Do you think it's a really important thing to overcome? Or people just get used to it?
I'll add some thoughts in there. So yes, it is something that is a thing and that it's very important. Again, I think it's very, very difficult for any sort of change to happen within the realm of DEI if you don't have that leadership buy-in. With that said, I personally, when I do my consulting work, don't like to do buy-in. For me, I prefer working with people that already have leaders bought in, because I think we're at a point where we've been talking for so long about why this work matters and why it's important. There's plenty of data out there. There's been research for years. I'm a huge fan of the McKinsey and Deloitte studies on DEI that have been ongoing, where they're constantly running quantitative and qualitative data that proves to us that leaders have to pay attention to this. So I'm in the camp of I don't do leadership buy-in. Caren, what are your thoughts?
So I very, very rarely take on a client that I have not talked to someone in leadership about, like, what is your goals? Why are you trying to do this? Why are you trying to do this now as opposed to before or later? So if I haven't had that conversation, at least with a decision maker, I am much less likely to take on that client. I will do some buy-in, but I know that work is kind of a 50-50 chance of actually working. Like, I know if I'm at this point where I have to help convince someone that DEI is important, I'm like, okay, we're going to do it. And hopefully you can change hearts and minds. And I like to try to make it as useful as possible for some folks, and to kind of take it out of an academic or theoretical point of view and talk about how it actually affects your employees right now. And if they still can't get that, then it's not going to work.
No, you've got to prioritize that. Otherwise it's fighting a losing battle. And those companies, like in this kind of, moving forward, are probably going to kind of fall behind because they're not understanding the data. Which companies do you think do it well? Or what organization do you, when you sit with a company, say this is a kind of company that you should look at as someone that's setting the standard? Is there any?
I can think of a couple of clients that are doing fairly well, but I can't name any names. But in the sort of public spotlight, I often struggle to think of names off the top of my head. I think we see bits and pieces of people attempting to do the right thing, well-intentioned, but I think there's also a lot of performative efforts that we've been seeing, especially over the past year and a half or so, which makes it challenging to weed out like who's really in this for the long haul and who's just here to sort of check a box, right, and say, oh, we have a DEI program and initiatives, so that they can kind of keep people happy. But that facade usually fades fairly quickly.
And then
I'll definitely think on that a little more.
No, it's right. And then coming back, I mean, that's really the idea. To me, that's really the idea of DEI in a box, right? Is that there's a lot of box ticking. There's a lot of kind of, right, we really feel that we need to do this well, but from a business leader perspective, myself, there's a huge amounts of information out there, a huge amount of data, but not a lot of, okay, this is the step you take. I liken it to, you have ISO, I think, in the US, do you? Kind of ISO, like the quality standards.
Yep, absolutely.
If you want to get your quality standards, you want to get an ISO certification. And I don't want to kind of, because I know there's a people context of this as well, right? And I don't want to kind of make it too much like, okay. But when I want to improve my quality of my product, I go to something, and this is how you do it. Whereas in diversity, it's this whole project is quite difficult because there is no set structure and set accreditation even for doing this, is there, at this point? And do you think that is obviously one of the business reasons for DEI in a box, isn't it?
Absolutely, yeah. And I think, things are so nuanced, which is what makes it so challenging for anyone to develop a guide. There are so many things that you have to take into consideration for your unique organization and situation and the goals that you're trying to achieve.
Yeah, there's also, I think that we both kind of also want to push back against the need for a checklist. And and the need for a linear guide of, well, do step A, step B, step C. Like it's a framework. And I always draw a business analogy, always, that when building a business or building a product, there are multiple ways of doing it, but you get to exactly the same aim. And there are different frameworks for doing it, but you again get to the same aim. It's really more important to think through, why are you doing this and what are you trying to achieve?
Yeah.
And hopefully in DEI in a box, like, yes, we will give you a linear path, but we're also challenging you to think about, why is this important to you? And you can make adjustments accordingly for your specific organization.
Yeah. So if we look at that then, so if we we have leaders listening to this and people that maybe are in kind of senior staffing, what would be the 3 key pieces of advice that you would give someone thinking about this in terms of diversity, in order to start that DEI journey? What questions should people be asking themselves?
I think the number one thing that we always talk about is starting with why. Why are you doing this? Why now, right? That's the most important question. There's actually a book called Start With Why that I love, but it's super important that, leaders understand why for the organization, why for us as leaders, why now? Did something happen, or is it just we looked up and realized, it's just time for us to take action?
Yeah, I would also say, how do you know you've been successful?
Yeah.
Because no initiative makes any sense unless there's some metrics behind it. How do you know that this has worked?
Yeah.
And how do you know that this has failed? And that's a good way of keeping yourself accountable, is putting some metrics around what you're trying to do. I think the last question is, who are you actually trying to help? Is this a performative thing for you, or are you really trying to help your employees, or trying to help the larger community? Like, who are you doing this for?
Yeah.
Absolutely.
I think I've a lot of this stuff, I always kind of reflect back on myself. So if I kind of ask myself those questions, such as why, and we've obviously talked about that a little bit here, is I think part of that is because once people start asking the question and you start understanding it, you start realizing, like I said, 25 years, I haven't been a very diverse recruiter, right? Full stop. And then when you start looking at your clients' workforces, and these are successful businesses that you work for, then you realize they haven't got very diverse workforces. And then, like you said, Caren, have I contributed to this? Could I have changed this? Could I have made this better? And then I think the other thing, that the why for me, is because huge amounts of customers now are asking me to say, how can I improve this? You're a recruiter, you're an expert in staffing. Surely, David, you should know how to do this. And I look back and I think, well, no, I don't actually have a clue how to do it. And I hope hope you understand I'm being quite honest here. I really don't know where to start. And then secondly, like you said about success, like, well, how will I know that I've actually achieved something, and how long will it take to achieve it? Because if I look now at the type of people that I'm still getting on the responses to my adverts, it's not going to change in 3 months or 6 months or 12 months, is it? So, I mean, how long do you think like this process will take, particularly in technology?
Yeah, I mean, I think it again is very nuanced. So it's going to depend on the organization and where you stand, and just kind of on the point of measuring things. I think it has to be more than just quantitative measurements. You need the quantitative measurements, but I think you also need the qualitative parts where you're actually hearing from people, right? How is my approach affecting, the people that I'm trying to recruit? How do they perceive this? If you're posting a job posting or advertisement, like, how do they perceive that? Are you using inclusive language? Are you posting on sites where those people are going to be looking, that they frequent? So you have to ask yourself all those questions. And then in terms of time, I think it's good to time box things, to say, hey, I want to try this for 3 months, try this for 6, try this for 12 months. And, part of our approach for DEI in a box is that we took an agile approach, much like you would in any kind of tech space, to make sure that we can go back, revisit, have a retrospective, reflect on how our work is affecting or not affecting outcomes, and then iterate from there. So it's a continuous process. to say like, how long is it going to take? It's hard to say. It's truly ongoing. There's never really a true endpoint, just as any other business initiative or strategy, as Caren was saying earlier.
Yeah, I think it's also important to not feel like you have to eat the elephant all at once.
Yeah.
That slow, consistent growth that is tangible and that builds on top of each other will always outpace big splashy initiatives. And so when you talk about timing, the answer is, well, it depends. It depends. Ultimately, it's a lifelong thing you're committing to talk about inclusivity and equity. Like, it's kind of a lifelong thing. But as you do it, you have to do it step by step, and you have to give yourself grace to kind of work through all of those pieces and parts. And you can't just go, all right, we've got 1 year and we're going to knock it out.
Yeah, that's it. We're going to be the best. Fixed and done. No, yeah, like you said, it is, and I guess different problems will come up as you go along. Like you said, how your staff feel about it, how it's maybe kind of, affecting the sort of culture. I'm just quite interested to kind of ask, do you think that, the whole kind of COVID, work from home, like GCS is going towards a more hybrid work. Do you think that will help this situation or hinder? Do you think like the changes in the workplace environment will also contribute to increasing diversity? I don't know what you think about that one.
Actually, I think it will. I think it will. I think that it gives us the opportunity to think and work more globally. It gives us the opportunity to be in spaces that make the most sense for us so that we really can bring our true selves to work. For those who might have disabilities, it now opens up the entire opportunity to still be able to work and contribute to a team and not have to worry about all of the steps it takes to get to an office every day.
Yeah, that's right.
So I think it just widens the door. And I think that widening the door is a great way of making things more inclusive.
I think it kind of depends. So I think for the vast majority, yes, there is some positive change, especially when it comes to diversity and identifying diverse talent. I think more people are online now. They're creating, their LinkedIn profiles, visiting different job boards. But I have seen a decrease in inclusion and equity for some of my clients, especially for underrepresented people who are sitting at home. And, typically if you're in an office, you may pass a leader in the kitchen or the hallway, there may be an extra conversation had, but you don't have that now. So when it comes to like giving assignments, some underrepresented people are saying, hey, I feel forgotten. It's as if, my manager or leaders aren't checking in with me. They're not thinking about promotions. They're sometimes feeling a little isolated in some regards. So I think some organizations, depending on where you are in terms of diversity, some employees may struggle, some may thrive and benefit. So again, case by case.
And one thing I've seen, depending, it's more on kind of your age and where you live, working from home can be, if you live in a nice house with a garden, where other than my dog, really annoying, but the work from home, you can make it quite a nice work from home environment. But if you haven't got that, if you're young and you're living with your parents, or you haven't got that kind of breakout space and you're living in a kind of studio flat, or just not in a nice place, and you haven't got nice Wi-Fi, you haven't got good Wi-Fi or something like that, that can actually be a real problem, can't it? That can actually make it much more difficult. For instance, like the whole recruitment, your video calls dropping out, you can't do the interview correctly. These sort of things are really difficult for people without a really great setup, isn't it?
Absolutely. It also opens the door for bias for people that are trying to be hired as well, right? Especially if you have a hiring manager or recruiter that hasn't fully identified and checked their biases. If I don't have a nice background and I hop on a call for a video call and you're judging me based on my background, or you hear my kids in the background yelling, and then your brain may be like, oh, well, does this person have time for this job? Or, I'm judging them based on where they live. So there's so many factors and layers to it.
I think this is where I'm probably more optimistic. I think that this is also a really good opportunity to check those biases. Like it's a moment to think of, okay, well, why do I care if that person doesn't have a nice background or not? Why do I care if that person's child might run into the room? That means that they can take care of their kid and come back. And now I don't have to worry about them going out for daycare, or, you know, if something happens, like you can handle all those things. And then and this is very selfish, but I absolutely love when dogs bark and things like that. It adds like such a personal touch where you're like, oh, I want to see the dog now. But
you might see him at any point. He's coming.
I think that it provides all of us an opportunity to truly reconfigure what work looks like, and to reconfigure what it looks like to get things done. And so, for some people, going in makes a ton of sense. For others, it doesn't. But to be able to have a space to do both, I think is really optimal.
Yeah.
And what other than maybe kind of moving towards a more hybrid, what other changes do you think kind of industry leaders need to make to create a more diverse workplace? I mean, there's obviously many, but what would be the first steps?
More diverse, or do you mean more inclusive workplaces?
I've said diverse. We could say inclusive. Maybe that's me not knowing the right words, but yes.
Yeah, no. I mean, I think in terms of inclusion, a lot of it has to just do with listening to people, listening to your existing people. What are their needs? I see so many people that just throw out benefits or say, hey, we're going to do this model, you know, this hybrid model, without even asking their people what they want or what they need and what's going to help them thrive. So just listening to people more, I think, is really something that leadership needs to shift on now that we've gone through this major change in our world.
And I would say also, in addition to that, like I would rank that as number one above all, actually listen to your people. I would also say get comfortable with the messy middle. So get comfortable with not just the uncomfortability of doing things, but get comfortable with the fact that you're going to try some things that don't work. You're going to try some things that may not come out the way you see it in your head. It may be a completely different thing than you see. Be comfortable with the process of making your organization more diverse and more inclusive, and know that there isn't a quick fix. There isn't a here's 6 months and everything will be okay. It's a process, and you have to be in that process.
And just to quickly add on to that, understand that you may lose some people along the way when you do that, right? You may lose a couple of clients who don't agree or aren't patient while you go through that process, and you have to be willing to sacrifice that, knowing that the impact is going to be so much greater.
And interestingly, what you mentioned there before, Caren, about, you know, working with certain clients who you feel are engaged with the process or not engaged with the process. And I guess as recruiters, that's also something that you need to be aware of, is that if you're, you know, in some ways committed to this, to helping people create more diverse and inclusive workplaces, that if people aren't committed to that, you need to be aware that you shouldn't just accept that. You know, you should stand up for it, really, shouldn't you?
Right, exactly. And it's, I think, and again, perhaps I'm being a little optimistic here, but I think that we will get
I like your optimism, Caren. It's good.
But I think that we'll get to a point where we have said you're either going to do this, you're going to get on board, or you're not going to get on board. And those that decide not to get on board will be left behind so much that they'll have no choice but to be like, okay, fine. Okay, you're right.
Yeah.
And so I think that it's our goal to kind of start pulling people towards that, so that they see that this is the right thing to do.
Yeah, that's right. And that comes back to business, which is that your business is growing, your employees are happier, that you're creating better products. It's not, like you said, it's not just a box ticking exercise. Like the studies prove that you will be able to create a better business off the back of this, right?
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And you know, the question I've got, which I think is big, thank you very much. So I feel I've learned quite a lot in this as well. So hopefully the listeners have as well. But what I'm quite interested in now, you know, how long were you both consultants before you began, so 9 months, and you were kind of a couple of years was you were working as DEI consultants, is that right?
I was in a consulting capacity for, I guess it was about a year-ish, maybe a little less than that for both of us, but I've been in the DEI space for quite some time now, not to give away too many years, but it's been a while. So I've been in a variety of DEI roles, starting with diversity recruiting in the tech space.
Sure.
Yeah, and I was a product consultant for years. So consulting is not new to me. And being in the DEI space, again, I was in the DEI space a couple of years before we started DEI in a Box. So that's also not terribly new, but the idea of being a consultant been one longer than I probably care to admit.
Well, I think so. My question is, obviously you've learned you learned a lot of truths for yourself, as you've progressed through, and as leaders, you've learned these things, and I'm very confident that the business itself will be a great success and will grow. So you're sitting here today, and you're able to set standards for yourselves, right? So it would be very important that your business is very diverse and inclusive, right? So how are you doing that when you're thinking about how you're going to grow your business and take people on? What do you think are the most important things for DEI in a Box to do to set those standards?
I think it's kind of just walking the talk, right? So if we're preaching all of this in our on-demand guide, then we have to make sure it reflects in the work that we're doing. And so we've been engaging with a variety of clients. Independently, we both have worked with clients that span the gamut. Of course, like we said, we kind of started in the tech space, but both Caren and I have worked with nonprofits. Karen's done some government contracting. I've worked with food and beverage, retail. So that diversity has really helped us in making sure that when we are interacting with clients, that we're making sure that we're interacting with diverse people on those teams as well, and taking very inclusive and equitable approaches to our consulting work. I think we could both call ourselves kind of thought partners or collaborators, even though consulting is the formal term. We are true collaborators. Like we're not going to go in and say, do X, Y, Z. We're going to come in and we're going to listen to your current needs, understand the scope of the work, and work with you, right alongside you as a partner, and hopefully teach people along the way so that they too can start to just think about DEI, in their everyday work, and less of, sort of a check the box add-on exercise.
Wonderful. Caren?
Yeah, I can't agree with that more. You said it perfectly. Can't agree with it more.
But I think, for myself, obviously the question is obviously kind of the GCS, like how are you going to do it? And I think, for me, the first thing is like, starting with that why. Why are we doing it? What success is, and what the outcomes that we want to drive, both for our business and for our customers. And I think sometimes it takes you have to have quite a long hard think, don't you? In terms of what this is all about and how it becomes a central tenet. So it's definitely something like I said, I've learned a lot in this conversation, so thank you very much. So guys, do you want to just do a quick kind of pitch of where can people find out about DEI in a Box? What's the best way to kind of get in touch with you guys?
Sure. Caren, you want to take it away?
Sure. Yeah. So find us at deinabox.com. You find us. We also have a YouTube channel where we post content usually about once a month or so. We also are going to host an office hours pretty soon. So we'll have those as opportunities to get a hold of us. But yeah, deinabox.com is your central place, and you can find all of our information there.
Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your time today.
Thank you for having us.
Look forward to seeing the success and also working with the product. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having us.
Thank you.